the recording. Okay, so we are on and we're recording, and I'm going to turn it over to our two speakers. We have Patty Konstantakis from Digital Promise, the Director of our Adult Learning Initiatives, and then Mike Berlin, Entangled Solutions, and they co-wrote a report on this market and will be sharing all those findings with you. So I turn it now to Patty.
Yeah, thank you. And hopefully all you guys can hear us well. I'm hoping that everything is going well, but I think it is. And I just want to thank you for joining us today. And as Suzanne said, Mike and I co-wrote a paper, and basically as we see it, we conceptualized this paper as a guide to really help entrepreneurs in particular understand a bit more about the adult learning market. It's not a new market, but it's unfamiliar to most people. And so our thought was, how do we kind of break it down for people to really look at, understand better, and really think about getting into this market? Where really, and somebody said, we have a quote in the paper, somebody says, where the K12 market is actually, the Edtech market is quite crowded, the adult education, adult learning market is not at all. So we want to try to draw people in and give you some ideas as to how to think about approaching this market. And we can take a lot of what we've learned from K12 and apply it here. And so you're going to see some of that as we talk about it. So let's first start with, wait, let me hang on. I got to play with, there it is. Okay, that's what you do. So let's start with a challenge. Let's just for those of you, many of you on here may know some of this and some of you may not, but ultimately we're talking about adult learners who are, for lack of a better way to put it, low-skilled workers, adults. There are 36 million adults in this country that read at or below a third grade level, which if you think about that, that's almost 15% of our population. And about 2/3 of those are in our workforce. They're folks who are working those frontline jobs, the janitors, retails, et cetera. And generally for these folks, there's very little opportunity for advancement, and they're looking for it and they need it and sort of all of that. In terms of education, across all of the education programs that are public and private. So, and we'll get into the specifics of those in a minute, but across everything that's available, only 4 million of those 36 million adults are actually being served by education programs that exist today, which basically means that leaves 32 million adults out there who are in need of some kind of education that can help them advance, but are currently not accessing it in any way. And if you think about it, and think about it that way, technology has this tremendous potential here. It can help us extend the reach beyond those 4 million that are being, we can extend our classrooms, but we can try to go direct to some of these adults and so on. So if you think about it, and technology also has, the ability to provide a more rich education, well, I'm going to say more rich, a rich learning environment for adults as well. So all that we've learned in K12 could be applied here just as well, is our thought. Next slide. Let's think about the market opportunity. According to a report done by Titan Partners last year, there's about $10 billion that's public and private that is kind of flows into the adult education system annually. And this basically supports the 4 million learners that I was talking about earlier. So if you see the what is this? It's an image. Sorry, this infographic that's sitting here in front of us. So that 10 billion is total spending, but what the estimate is that there's about 800 million that's actually being spent on instructional materials to serve those 4.1 million adults. They also estimate, and that's sort of the bottom of this infographic. So they also see a market potential for those other 32 million learners, right, at about $3 to $6 billion if we're really thinking about if we were to really address that particular market, the opportunity here is large. And I think that's one of the things that people often don't see, is that they sort of think about it from that 800 million and those 4 million, 4.1 million, which by the way is pretty sizable just by itself. But if you add on all of those others, then the opportunity here is tremendous and worth really paying attention to. Yeah. Okay, next here. The other thing you really have to think about when you're thinking about the adult education market is really to think about policy. The Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act is probably the key piece of legislation that governs federal funding for adult education and workforce development. The reauthorization of this bill was passed in 2014, and it had a few key changes that are important here. It used to be that the adult education funds, or so this Adult Education Family Literacy Act, which is AEFLA, is what's written there, and the workforce development funds, they were completely separate programs and funding mechanisms. With the change in 2014, they allowed for the integration of these funds. And so there are ways in which programs used to be silos, and that there are ways in which they're working at this point to try to be less siloed. I think that's the point of what they're trying to do. So not only are the programs less siloed, then the funds can be a little more flexible, and that's kind of important. The adult education funds were significantly less than the workforce development previously. So being able to kind of integrate those can make a huge difference here. The other big change was that there's a requirement now that all of these programs, both adult education and workforce development, integrate some level of technology and digital skills education for their students. So that's, while small, it's also a very, very big deal, because there are a lot of programs out there that had not been doing this. And so now it's required, and they've spent the last year really creating plans. And so that third bullet there, that we also required that each state create a unified plan on how they were going to actually integrate these programs and integrate technology into those programs. That's a really big deal, because now what's happening is that kind of at that state level, it's being recognized that all of these programs really are looking for high quality content and looking for technology that will actually address the adult needs that are there. So it sets the policy stage is a good one. It's one that we can work in pretty easily at this point. Is the shorthand on all of that particular thing. You're going to see that what we did was build in places for questions. So if there's anybody here who wants to ask a question at this particular point, on any of that, feel free. We'll give you a second. And Suzanne always tells me to be a good teacher and wait for the question.
Practice the wait time. You all can unmute and ask questions, or you can type them into the chat.
So these are questions about policy, questions about
market.
the overall size of the market.
Right, we've got more to go, but. All right, thanks, AJ. We can see that. All right, we'll go ahead and keep going, and if there's questions on this, we can always address them later as well. So one of the things we did in the report was actually call out the customer segments in this market. We thought it was important to understand, who you could go out and sell to is basically how it goes. So the biggest set of customers are really the learning providers that exist today. And so I've kind of broken it down into two main things here, the community colleges and then the K12 districts and community-based organizations. So by far, the community colleges are actually the biggest and best funded. They actually serve more of our adults than most of the other learning providers. They get it's estimated that there's about 7.5 billion of that 10 billion that we had talked about earlier, 7.5 of it flows into the community colleges through federal and state funding. There's 100 community colleges. What I would say about the community colleges, they have a great tech infrastructure, most of them do, but they don't always serve the lowest skilled learners. There's a lot of what the community colleges serve are GED, ESL, and then sort of that set of programs that folks call developmental ed, that is the stepping stone up into the college credit types of courses. But they still qualify a ton for this funding. They still are basically talking about the same adults that we're talking about too. And so thinking about the community college as a customer is important. The other thing I would say about community colleges is there's 1,000 of them instead of, and so you working to go, you still got to go. There's no central, there are not a lot of central areas. You've got to go to each community college basically and do your selling to each of the community colleges, which can be tricky. But I'll leave that there. On the K12 district and community-based organization.
Let me actually interrupt you because we have two questions and one ties directly to community colleges,
Okay.
as well as goes into the funding. So Justin asked the question, what does that 10 billion in funding consist of? Is that different sources, or is that something you'll answer as we go along?
So say the 10 billion?
Yeah.
The 10 billion is all funding, and it is private public, so that the estimate that Titan did was really it included federal funds, state funds, and any kind of private funding that was there too in terms of their. So it's a big chunk. Okay, I hope that answers that question. And then I'm seeing that we've got another one from Sanjay.
Yes. So what kind of technology and tools do community colleges use to bridge the gap between students and opportunities?
That's a good question. It's a good question. I don't know that I have a good answer for it at this particular point. Does anybody else? Do you, Mike?
Yeah, I would say that the answer is not enough. I think that more than any other sector of education, a lot of the actual instruction is classroom-based, face-to-face instruction, moderated by a teacher, and using paper on print textbooks and sometimes online version of those textbooks. So some of the pedagogical and technological improvements in other sectors like adaptive learning, personalized mobile-based instruction we're only at the very, very forefront of those solutions being used with the adult population within community colleges.
Yep. Yeah, it's true. Suzanne was saying, don't pay attention to the chat because you'll get distracted. So I was like, look at me, I'm paying attention to the chat. So Suzanne, I'll let you interrupt or whatever.
Yes.
You can pose the questions to us. That'll be easier than,
Yeah.
because I'm like, I'm getting distracted quickly.
We know what we're going to say, but we really like to see what you guys are saying.
It's true.
Yeah, and thank you for your comments. Lots of good things going on for participants to read in the chat.
I know, it's great. Thank you guys. It's a ton. Let me kind of go on from here because there are some good comments in there. So let me move on to the K12 districts and community-based organizations. Although I have them together, they generally operate separately. So some states, California and Florida, I know for sure, and there's several others, fund adult education with K12 district funds, with K12 funds. So each of the K12 districts have adult schools. And so the advantage to that in some ways from a technology and from kind of our particular point of view is that there are ways in which they can piggyback off of the technology and the products that they're using in their schools already at the district level. Then we can piggyback off of that, and adults can also have access to those same products. The other thing that's really interesting is that the schools in a lot of ways have with that model, the schools have access to the parents of those kids in ways that some of the community-based organizations don't have. One of the movements that's fairly new, not super new, is this notion of dual generation learning. So there are two-generation learning. You're seeing more and more of that family literacy type of model to really work to help both the students and the parents learn. And those have been applied in several cases. So that model has been applied in several different ways. Some is in just English, so helping parents learn English through their students, and the students and parents together are doing ESL work. Some are doing reading work, and there's been a lot that we've seen around in family literacy models where young kids, like preschool and kindergartners, are learning to read, and the parents are helping them, and there are ways in which that has greatly increased the parents' reading abilities. And then we're seeing it more and more with digital skills as well. So it's an interesting, as we think about it, when you think about that K-12 market, you have to think about that adult school, but think about also the fact that all of those kids have a whole ton of parents, and a lot of our low-skilled parents are included there. And so thinking about a product from a point of view of a family literacy model or going into those adult schools is important. The other thing I would say is those K-12 districts are used to talking to product developers and vendors, and so are looking for good quality products to put in there. The community-based organizations, or CBOs, are smaller. Typically, it varies by state, kind of where they are, how they function, how they get funded. They tend to serve the lowest level of students and learners there. The thing I would say, kind of the biggest point here, is that there's no good centralized way of getting to all of these CBOs in most cases. That's not totally true. There's some states that have, or they've either formed some consortiums, or the state itself is working in a coordinated effort across the state to really provide consistent materials for everybody. But for example, I'll give you a couple of examples. In California, there's a group called OTAN that really does a great job of getting technology and working with folks. So they spread the word, as it were. They function a bit as a consortium, but not completely. They don't really buy for folks. They recommend, and they're a great recommender. They work with all of the WIOA funded community-based organizations that there are in the state they work with. Then there's another group in Florida that has a wonderful acronym called FATDEC, which is like the Florida
Adult and Technical Distance Education Consortium.
There.
I've written that.
You had to write it down to say. That consortium works. They really are a group that is both a service provider for adult education programs in Florida, and then they also use their combined. They do a combined buying model.
Yeah, they buy cooperatively.
Right. So they function as a buying consortium as well at the state. And then the other good example, I think, is the state of Kentucky, in which they too try to work at the state level to actually purchase and recommend, in particular, technology products for all of their programs in the state as well. I don't know if there's other questions there. We'll keep going. I'll just talk quickly about the needs and pain points of these learning providers, and it's important to kind of understand where they're each coming from, so that you can think about how might you both create a product for them, but then also think about selling to them, right? So I think one of the biggest need, one of the things that works for them, is that they need to keep their retention and completion rates up, right? So, and most of the time their funding depends on the fact that they've got students that are coming through their programs and they're completing on a kind of regular basis. But the other thing that I would tell you that we heard a lot as we talked to our program and our educators, our program administrators and educators, is that like almost every time they'd say to us, you know what, we just can't find great quality content. Like if there was one thing we need great quality content that meets the needs of our adult learners. And, you know, we said, yeah, you're right, we do. And so, you know, please, let's create some, but that's a really big need. And I think the other thing, in particular at the community-based organizations and some of the K12 adult schools, because technology is fairly, the use of technology in their teaching is fairly new, they're unsure of and uncomfortable with technology and are working to learn how to implement technology effectively. And so that's still, the professional development there is still a very big deal. So when you think about a product for them, you have to really think about, for folks who are not used to technology and using technology in teaching, how do we make sure that they get the right ramp up that they actually need? Yeah? Okay, Mike's gonna speak now.
Yeah, and thank you, Patty. So
sorry.
Patty said earlier, 2/3 of the 36 million low literate adults are actually currently in the workforce. So this is not a problem that should be met just at educational institutions. The onus is partially on the companies themselves to help train their workforce. So a lot of these employees are working the front line in major industries like retail, manufacturing, healthcare, hospitality. And although employers invest $70 billion on education and training their employees generally, traditionally most of that money has been with higher end employees, middle management and above, and training on more relevant job skills. To date, a lot of basic education training has been limited and has been done outside of the employer. Set places that do that, such as American Job Centers, where there are 2,500 centers that give adults basic skills training, only serve 70,000 adults and only have $20 million in funding. One area that's increasingly played the role of providing basic training is union training funds. So one instance is the 32 BJ Training Fund that serves the SIEU Service Workers Union, I think nationally, but primarily in the Northeast. They do a lot of good work with making sure their employees get basic training. And I'll just also add this. I think that although a limited amount of the $70 billion is directed to basic education and training, we're seeing across the board that that's starting to grow. And the reason is that employers are starting to realize that increased job satisfaction and decreased employee attrition will lead to overall better performance and higher economic return. So that we believe that this is a trend, and we believe that this is a trend that's going to continue. Next slide. So similar to the education institutions, employers will say they are badly in need of relevant, good content. And the one difference is that content needs to be relevant to the actual jobs. That content also needs to help employees build career pathways, increase their skills. And again, there's an economic incentive for employers to invest in this because it reduces attrition, which reduces the cost of recruiting your employees, and it will lead to higher job performance. One final thing, there was an estimate I read in Pro Literacy and calculated that they say $225 billion a year is a result in non-productivity of a lower educated workforce. I have not read that particular statistic. That's everything. Okay, so, and as Carissa makes the point here in the chat, it's important not to forget, those potential 32 million learners who aren't currently in some kind of an education program. And I'd say,
we know that these learners exist, and we know that, like, their counterparts in our programs, they have a lot of unique learning needs and challenges, but we also know less about, there's some buts, that's what that but is all about, but how do we reach them? We don't know yet exactly how to reach them directly. We outline in the paper, we suggest that maybe there are ways in which we need to use kind of, your old-fashioned sales and marketing strategies that you use to get to consumers, and figure that out in terms of how you get here. What we do know is that you really need to think about where are these learners, and how do you meet them where they're at. We have had different people and different discussions with folks, think about, what might we do with doctors and clinics in the healthcare system, because they're definitely there. What partnerships might we forge with some of those organizations? This sort of where else might we find them? And that's an important piece here. Two other big questions for us is knowing that these learners typically have need some extra support as they learn, mostly because they've probably had unsuccessful educational experiences in the past and may have confidence issues and that sort of thing. So how might we support them from a distance? And there's some great ideas out there floating right now, how to think about coaching through a mobile platform, how to think about, I know that Jennifer Cobrin is here from Philly, and they're doing some offline for their online learners. They're trying to do tutoring sessions and getting in-person mentoring for folks. So trying to figure out how we think about ways to support folks at a distance is a big deal. And then, of course, there's the question, given that most of these learners don't have a lot of excess money ultimately to actually spend on things, the question will be, will they actually pay? And I'll say that there's a reason to believe that they will. The evidence kind of says that they will, especially if there's high quality content. One of the best examples that I keep pointing to, let's put it that way, many years ago, I want to say like 10, 15 years ago, there was an ESL program that was being sold to consumers via infomercials. Literally, it's called Inglés Sin Barreras. The thing cost, it was a package, thank you, of videotapes and workbooks. The thing cost $1,800, and they sold so much of that, and people scraped and got what they could together to actually buy it, because they had heard that it was good. They had heard that they could do it on their own time. They could do it in their own pace. They could do it at home, all that kind of stuff. And so people really, really, really did buy into that. And so there are other examples around the world where you see this kind of a thing, that if they believe that it can do something for them and will help them advance, they will find a way to pay for it. Now, that doesn't mean you need to price it at $1,800, but you can think about pricing structures and business models that might actually work here. I'll say, in terms of needs and pain points for this customer segment, they're just not unlike what the folks who are in the programs. We didn't really talk too much about that, but ultimately, they're looking to advance in their job and their life at some level. They have time constraints and access constraints, multiple jobs. The transportation to get to programs, all kind of limits them in the ways that they can actually have access to educational opportunities. And they typically have different educational backgrounds, meaning they come to us with some people they're educated in their home country, for example, but need English. Others weren't so educated in their home country and need English. Others have it's been a long time since they've been in school, and so then they need a refresher for everything that they're trying to do and get to a GED, etc. So there's just a lot of different backgrounds, and so thinking through, when you think about these needs and pain points and products for them, you need to account for that, allowing for folks to either get some kind of individualized pathway through their educational experience, or just accounting for the fact that that's the case.
Patty, let me interrupt here.
Questions, so let's see what else.
Yeah, we'll get the questions in a second.
We got
just
one
wanted
more.
to
Okay.
touch on one more.
We got one more.
Got it.
More customer segment, and then we'll go.
Yeah, so quickly, there are other places where adults are currently receiving education. One of the least considered, but one of the more important ones, are correctional systems. There are 4,500 facilities across the country that currently provide educational programs. And I've seen one statistic that 700,000 people leave the state prison system every year to enter the workforce and hopefully to be more educated. I think 75% of state prisoners are classified as low literate. And there have been a number of studies that suggest that any dollar spent on prison education pays for itself multiple times over in reduced recidivism. Somebody that receives education in prison is 43% less likely to return to prison and 28% more likely to be employed upon release. So there are emerging set of initiatives and programs that are focused on providing good quality education in prison that can teach basic education and also job skills. For lack of time, I won't go into all of them, but one that's interesting is a group called Last Mile. It's a full coding boot camp for prisoners, launched in 2014 out of San Quentin, that will actually teach the full coding stack and allow prisoners to both work on coding projects while there and get jobs when they leave. Then the other increasingly important channel is libraries, which function as community centers that provide important job skill training, tech training, and other resources. So there are some very innovative public libraries like the Chicago Library System that invests in what they call tech navigators, people that will actually serve as coaches to help provide basic tech training to help the adult population actually utilize the resource they have access to.
Yeah, we've got Carissa from Rhode Island, who also is part of the library system there too, and she could tell you all about all the great things that they're doing there, that it's innovating with technology like crazy, and really functioning as a great hub for folks who are seeking digital skills and coding skills, and they're doing all kinds of interesting stuff there as well. Okay, now we'll take questions. That's our slide.
Some of the main ways that can be the case is, one, provide more career context. So the educational experience will directly lead to some type of achievement that will help increase employability. And the other is more high quality hands-on support. Duolingo, I think that there's a wide population that uses it, but people that want something more extensive and more support oriented are not going to be satisfied with Duolingo's offering.
Agreed. What else? Any other questions? Waiting for Suzanne. She'll
There aren't any more currently in the chat. We've covered all of those.
Great. We'll keep going. I see lots of comments, which I love. You guys, we have to figure out how to publish these along with our recording, Suzanne. It'll be, because there's lots of great stuff happening in there. It's great. Thank you, guys. All right, so then we want to move, think a little bit about a couple other issues, whatever, a couple other things. As you're thinking about, as an entrepreneur and thinking about these customer segments, like what are the things you really need to think about for your product, and ultimately what we're looking for is hoping that we can get entrepreneurs interested in this market and really and they can be entrepreneurs, and I know Vinod, you're here also, that have a product that's already aimed at K12, but how might we actually think about adapting that for adults, or creating something new for adults would be great as well. And so to us, there were kind of three big pieces, three big things you want to consider when you're designing products, and you want to focus on those unique needs of the adults. And I think what Mike said in terms of having support that and contextualized, and it's kind of the third bullet here too, but wrapping the foundational skills that they need in the relevant of their world, right? So the workforce skills, and making sure that it makes sense. So part of the problem is you don't really want to teach somebody to do math outside of context. It works a heck of a lot better for adults if you're actually teaching them those math skills in context with where they're going to use them. And ultimately that relevance matters a lot. We've got, in fact, if some of you don't know about this, we've got on our site a couple of other reports and design reports that talk about knowing how adult learners learn, how might we design products for them. So you can refer to some of that if you'd like to. But the other big thing is supporting anytime, anywhere learning. Like that's a really big deal. So for as much as we're serving 4 million folks in our education programs, trying to figure out how to extend out and beyond the classroom is a super important piece. So how do we support that, including the support for the individual student as they're going along learning. And then as our workforce folks really reiterated to us over and over and over again, how do we create contextualized integrated content and apps for adults? Because that really will make a good that will help. I can't sometimes I know. Sorry. All right, moving on.
Yeah, so as anybody that's been in the business knows, one of the biggest challenges, how do you distribute your product and how do you solve sales and marketing? Now, unfortunately, there is no silver bullet, and it is difficult because you have such a fragmented landscape of where learning takes place. So I think, unfortunately, it's going to be a challenge. You have to work through it. But a couple of points to mention, one is that for providers that also have a product that serves K-12, there is a different licensing model that's required. Unlike K-12, there's more of a transient nature to the adult learning market. So providers seek payment models that allow them to easily transfer seats in cases with low enrollment. Another is a sponsorship model. So rather than just selling directly to the educator, there are government entities and corporate sponsors who have a willingness to buy licenses on behalf of the educators and behalf of the students. And then, as we've talked about already, at Entangled Solutions, and we believe there is an opportunity for direct-to-learner purchasing models. If a product has the right context and the learners will believe will make a difference in their lives. And then the fourth thing that's not here, but we talked about earlier, is there needs to be more work on behalf of the buyers of educational products to better organize and to help the entrepreneurs be able to reach them more easily. And we're seeing that with the rise of some consortia, like FatDeck and some of the others that Patty mentioned.
Mm-hmm.
So then the other big problem of how do you solve selling your product is how do you get funding to build your product and grow your product in the first place. Traditional venture capital, unfortunately, has been a little slow to invest in basic educational solutions. We believe that one of the problems that resulted from is a result of that is that there are few funded companies that have had success, and therefore it's a self-perpetuating problem where fewer investors invest in that. But at the same time, I think this is an opportunity for true category-defining businesses to enter into that space. And I would say there are some mission-oriented VCs like 1776, Village Capital, and others that do look at this market. And I would hope that since this is such a critical opportunity, that more and more VCs will be open to this opportunity. So in addition to traditional venture capitals, there's a hybrid, what I call social impact funds, but philanthropic foundations that invest in for-profit companies. Some of these are Emerson, Omidar, Michelson 20 Million Minds, Strata, and a host of others. So they invest like VCs, but rather than just looking at profit maximizing companies, they look at mission-oriented companies. So I think that there is an increasing willingness to invest in companies focused on adult basic education. And then third, there's grant funding from a whole host of foundations, both private and corporate. Some of the big ones are Joyce Foundation, Dollar General, Walmart Foundation, and then a number of others.
Yep.
Can I jump in? Because we have a question, actually the same question about sponsorship models. Vinod asked if you can give maybe some examples of that. And then Angela asked if you could just talk more about them and how sponsors would be identified.
Yeah. So some of those, like there's a company called Sell Ed that's doing a great job in selling their product. I believe they've done a deal with Discovery Education, who's an interest in spreading their products. So they bought licenses on behalf of a number of people. I think libraries really are an example of a sponsorship model where libraries buy licenses on behalf of their constituents. I think that the way to identify it is to find corporations and organizations that are vested in the adult populations, invested in their success. Sometimes it's corporate social responsibility wings of big companies. Sometimes it's you can look at people that have just invested in past initiatives.
Yeah, interesting. So we come to kind of to the end of a bunch of questions. So you're welcome to keep doing the chat, or you can unmute, but we've got about another 15 minutes or so, and would love to just take questions and actually some of you guys that are making great comments in here too, and have some knowledge that in addition to ours, love to just have you guys unmute and talk through some of this as well. So how about this one question? So do sponsors need to pay nonprofits, or can they pay us directly? That's a question.
I think the answer can be both, but I've seen it both ways. Sometimes they can pay you directly in exchange for you providing your service to agreed upon number of people. And sometimes they will have a relationship with the nonprofit. So it depends on the case.
Yeah, we're just actually the sponsorship model we just are doing to a certain extent. We have a new project that not that many people know at this particular moment because it just got announced last week. We're doing a partnership with Facebook in teaching digital skills, middle digital skills to workers, starting first up in the Rust Belt in the Michigan, Ohio, Pennsylvania area. And basically what's happening is that Facebook is operating as that sponsor. And so it's so that for the workers and for the learners, the curriculum and all of what they're learning is going to be free, and Facebook is actually picking up that tab. Have you explored training instructors or integrated tech and similar talks and getting paid to do so? Or payment for training on how to use products? So exploring it in terms of how as an entrepreneur, as a company that is then selling their product development their professional development services? Is that the kind of thought? Has anyone done that here yet? I know of a couple of organizations that are not product developers, but they're professional development coaches and trainers, and they do definitely sell their services for sure in terms of training, in particular around integrating technology into teaching. So there's a few and handfuls of those, but I don't know that many more. And I don't know if you're the only one on here that is actually a entrepreneur right now. I can't tell because I'm not looking at the list of participants, but how are you handling that, Vinod, the training piece?
Oh, okay. Can you hear me?
Yep,
Yeah.
we can.
Okay. Well, for training, if it's, I think I made an earlier comment that we're making a big distinction between the funded organizations and the non-government funded. So to us, like community-based organizations that are funded through WIOA, through state ABGD grant here in California are different. They're all alike. So San Diego Public Library's literacy is like an adult school or community college, and they can pay, and we go out and train them on site, or we do Zoom-based training like this. On the other hand, there's the nonprofit, for example, Somali Bantu Association near us. They don't have funding that can pay for instructional materials. And it's really wrong to kind of approach them, I think, and say, use some of your very precious funding to pay for learning upgrade courses. So what we do with them is we donate, and then if things look good after a semester or so, then we can together find funding, them and us. And training becomes difficult because if you're going to be donating all over the country to nonprofits, if you can do training through videos and through Zoom meetings and things, that's what we do. But it becomes very difficult, obviously, to fly out or do expensive training in those situations. And so we're facing that right now. I mean, we've got 2 libraries in Brooklyn and Queens, New York, that just started deploying our courses in a free trial, and it's difficult for us as a small company, obviously, to fly out across the country for that. But the other thing I wanted to mention is what we're seeing is a fringe gray area between your independent learner that you and Mike, identified, and the community-based orgs. In other words, what we're discussing with a lot of people, not the institutions. I don't know how, for some reason, the institutions are not that interested in expanding out to that 38 million, but the community-based, they really want to find a way to reach 10 times or 100 times as many learners, people like the Somali Association and others. So I think the way to the independent learner, in a way, is if someone can figure out how to get it to the independent learner through these CBOs, but the CBOs can't pay for it. So your sponsorship or something like that's gonna have to kick in.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Super interesting. So AJ, where are you from? It sounds like you're, and I like you say, retention completion are some of your biggest concerns. Did you say you were in Texas? I don't know. I could roll back through and see, but oh, Oklahoma. Thanks. It's close, but I'm not supposed to say Oklahoma. I'm not supposed to call you a Texan from Oklahoma. Yeah, you're in that same place of how to. Thanks. You're in the same place that I think a lot of organizations are, right? How do we do this? And I'd say that on this webinar, there's a few folks who can speak a little bit to ways that they're trying to do it. I know Jennifer Corbin from Philadelphia has been at this for several years in terms of how to the instruction online, and then how to access folks. And oh yes, we have. See, look, you guys, nice. They're a little interactive, whatever. So they've been doing quite a bit, and there's a lot. They're one of our beacons, which is because they've been at this for a while, and they're experimenting and iterating, as we say, a lot. They're willing to experiment, and they're willing to try something new, and then learn from that and then go from there. So they've got some online courses. They've got a whole bunch of different kinds of things that I could let Jennifer tell you about. But I'm curious if anybody wants to just chime in with some suggestions for AJ. I don't know.
Hey, this is Jen. Can you guys hear me?
Yep.
I mean, I think AJ, like as Patty mentioned, we've literally been doing this for 4 years, and I feel like every year we just try a bunch of new things. I mean, this is such a new area in terms of providing online and blended learning to adult learners that I don't think anybody's like really cracked that nut. I mean, one thing that we're focusing on right now is just how important having like a really specific goal is, particularly for our adult learners. And so what we've noticed is like the more that our learners come in with like a very specific reason for taking an online course, the more successful they'll be. And our courses that are just kind of like general reading and math courses meant for learners at a specific grade level that they've tested in at just haven't been as successful. And I think that may just be the case for our like very unique situation, but it is really interesting how like a learner's goal for doing online learning like can like really affect their success, or at least kind of that's like one of our biggest lessons learned recently.
And so how are you handling that then? Are you helping people understand that goal, or are you kind of filtering by like, hey, you guys have this goal, and so we can help you this way? How are you addressing that at this point?
So one of the things that we are doing now, and I actually just had a meeting with our consultant that's doing this work like this morning, so it's hot off the press, but we're basically taking like a bunch of our individual reading and math courses and putting them into like one mega reading course and one mega math course. And then from there, the learner gets enrolled and basically picks and chooses which modules they're doing like based on their goals. So when they come into the class, they get asked like sort of like, hey, what's your goal? Why are you here? Is it to prepare for the entrance exam for CCP? Is it that you want to get your GED? Like why, what does that mean to you? And then from there, the instructor will like select certain modules for them to do that are very, very customized to that individual. And so that's kind of the model that has been kind of working for us. And we're right now kind of redesigning all of our courses to follow that model. And we used to do more cohort-based instruction, but what we found is that learners just kind of tend to come in to our program like all during the year for different reasons. And so just having something where it just open enrollment and they can get enrolled, the day or the week that they come in is just so much more successful than saying, hey, we have another cohort starting like next month, which they may or may not come back for. So I don't know if it's going to work or be successful, but that's just kind of like where our heads are with it right now. Talk to us next year and maybe we'll say something totally different. But
I'll give you 6 months.
Yeah.
Well, no, what's great about what you guys do is, you're willing to try, and then you actually, you do make the changes and you learn from that, and then you kind of add to there and so on and so forth, which I think is really, really, really powerful way of thinking about iterating, as we've talked about in the past. So I think that's really great. And having partners, having product development partners on that who will go along with that iteration is important too. And so I know Vinod, you're doing some of that, and I know several other people who are doing that too, that they're willing to think through pilots that are, okay, well, let's try it that way, and that some of that's important as a whole for what we're all doing to try to figure out how do we do this and do it well. So big program. I don't know who else is on here. I'm like, here, I'll ask you guys questions instead of you guys asking us questions. Can somebody talk to other kinds of, I guess I'm thinking about some of the big product developers, like somebody mentioned Edmentum. I know some of the bigger GED folks. I'm curious how those actually work, as if anybody's implemented those, and how what are the advantages and sort of challenges around some of those bigger, more established full curriculum kinds of things. I don't know.
I'm just at a plug, not for something that we did, but a report, I think it was released either yesterday or this week, from Joyce Foundation and SRI, where they did a full year study of 8 of the largest education providers on the efficacy and impact of those programs. And it's interesting that the results were mixed. They didn't find a lot of impact, but the report does talk about how blended models work best of the things that do work. So it further illustrates the difficulty of efficacious programs, the opportunity of having something truly game-changing, and the difficulty that everybody faces.
Yeah,
but it's worth a read.
Yeah, we're releasing, in fact, today, we have an infographic that kind of summarizes all of that finding that many of you will find in your inboxes later today and tomorrow. But yeah, it was a great study that was complex at so many levels, because we all understand the transient nature of these particular learners. And so it was tricky to actually get a nice rigorous study, but this is probably one of the few that's been done. And as he says, the specific impact results in terms of did it really help them learn, those were a little bit mixed. But in terms of the enthusiasm of the learners for technology, of the instructors for technology, that was super high and off the charts. And then, as you say, there's several models that they saw that folks were really trying to experiment with, and there are ways in which they saw what they ultimately found was that the more that you actually integrated the technology into the actual teaching and learning and made it mandatory, right? So it wasn't just an optional thing that you did after class, maybe somewhere, that it was actually part of what you needed in order to learn, the more successful and the more impact we're actually going to have. That's kind of their biggest takeaway. So it's really cool. There, we did a plug for that too.
Okay.
Worth a read.
Patty, that brings us to 1 minute to 1. So do you all have any final, Patty or Mike, any final thoughts before people move on with their day?
I guess the final thought I'll do 30 seconds and then you can have one. I guess what I would say is, it's an important market to be a part of. And if we can do anything to sort of keep this momentum moving forward, to really think about ways that we can use technology from a research point of view, from an implementation point of view, and from a product development point of view, we're here to do that. We want great quality content and apps for this population.
Yeah, and I would just say, coming from the perspective of an investor and an entrepreneur in other parts of education, I'd say that this is a very, very important area that more people should be focused in. And part of this small but growing community of operators needs to be able to help share information, share successes, and help guide each other to help further all of us.
Yeah. So yeah, here, and just one last thing for the actual report. Here's where you find it. I encourage you, if you haven't already, to read through it. It's a great report. But there's good information here, and share it broadly would be great.
Right, and you all will receive as registrants the video of this webinar, and we'll also put in that email that link as well, so you can see the report there. So thank you everyone for coming. It was a great discussion, and we hope you have a great rest of your day.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
That was great.
Great, thanks. Yeah, no, and the fact that we had the chat up actually probably helped us
Mm-hmm.
because there were two. I think if there'd only been one of us, it would be harder to
Right.
monitor the chat or whatever, right? But it was great and there was a lot of. So can you copy this chat and include it somewhere too? I guess. I think there's interesting stuff here for people to look at, you know?
Yeah, all I could do was put it to a Google Doc,
Yeah.
and link to the blog, I guess.
Yeah. I guess that's the right way to do it.